All right. It's a very good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in this wonderful world of ours. My name is Marlon Zakeo. I work with the Southern Africa Trust and based in Johannesburg. And I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this, our seventh edition of the Society Talks webinar series that we began airing out on different platforms, on Zoom, and here live for those of you who are live on YouTube. Essentially, as a response from the Southern Africa Trust and our partners in civil society to a lot of the social ills and challenges that we've been facing. The coronavirus is just the latest in a deluge of development challenges that have been wreaking havoc, particularly on the most marginalized in our society, in those that are often in the margins and in the blind spots of policymakers and other powerful stakeholders in our societies. So we are inviting you every Wednesday from 1600 hours to 1700 hours Central African time to come and join us for this session that we call Society Talks, to engage on different topics that are of concern to various sectors in our communities. We have met with civil society organizations from across Southern Africa. We have focused on the issues of social protection. We have spoken on the issues that are challenging smallholder farmers. We have also had a fascinating conversation with young people from across our continent on the Africa that they want to see and how they are being impacted by COVID-19. And also, what are the innovation and ideas that our young people are bringing forth to the table. So in this latest edition, I am so pleased that we joined by colleagues that are based in South Africa, in Madagascar, and Zimbabwe, colleagues that are working on the front line, addressing some of society's most pressing challenges. I think I should say that it's also pointed that this week that we are meeting has been one of the most challenging weeks, as if the world was not already full of very gloomy and bad news. The world was not able to breathe for a long, long time before the events of last week in the US. We've not been able to breathe because of the effects of climate change and natural disasters that are increasing each year and harming the most vulnerable and the poorest in our communities. We've not been able to breathe because of issues and cases of increase in abuse of women and children in our societies. We've not been able to breathe because of a lot of issues on toxic politics, in which the powerful continue to ignore the needs of the majority of our citizens. And in this week, we will also remember and be in solidarity with the African American population in the United States, following the tragic murder of George Floyd in that country. And as often is the case, when it comes down to the most pressing challenges in society, people say charity begins at home. People go back to the community to offer solutions. And that's why this week is quite, I think, suitable that we are discussing the role of community foundations in addressing society's most pressing challenges, and specifically for this week, how community foundations are responding to the challenges that have been brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, and how they themselves are in turn as institutions are being affected, what they are seeing as they go about doing the work that they've been doing for so long, often unrecognized, but doing some of the world's most critical work, supporting the most vulnerable communities that are out there. I don't mean to sound gloomy, because at the same time as we have all these challenges, we often see community foundations as a beacon of hope, because in all of these challenges that we face, community foundations have been a resource that are keeping our countries and our societies ticking on and are helping to lift up some of the most innovative people who the world would not even see were it not for some of the work that these women and men do. So again, it's my pleasure to welcome this afternoon. For the next hour, we will be in conversation with Beulah Fredericks, who joins us from the Western Cape. We will also have Jeremy, who I believe is also in the Western Cape. Jeremy will correct me if I'm wrong. And then we have Niaina, who is joining us from the beautiful island of Madagascar. I'm not sure, Niaina, if you're in Antananarivo, but we'll wait to hear more from you. We should be joined by Busisa Moyo from Bulawayo in Zimbabwe to hear more about how community foundations in Zimbabwe are responding to the global pandemic. And so warm welcome to you, my fellow panelists. I will start with Beulah to introduce yourself, Beulah, and the community foundation that you work with. And as you introduce yourself, Beulah, just to say, how are you as Beulah? And in this whole situation, what are you seeing, and how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the work that you do? Okay, we need to unmute Beulah there.
Beulah is muted. I don't know if it's possible for somebody to unmute her.
I'm here now. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Yes, I'm Beulah Fredericks, and I'm from the Community Development Foundation in Cape Town, Western Cape, South Africa.
I think it's still muted on the other side. I think. Oh, there we
go. Please, Beulah, you can go ahead. We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. So as I said, I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and I work for the Community Development Foundation, Western Cape. So let us say how I feel. I feel good. I feel very hopeful despite everything. Yes, it's a different, very much a different situation, and especially now since the 1st of June, because it seems that there's such a urge to go to the normal. So, so we heard so many negatives that's happening in our communities since the 1st of June. But that doesn't mean that we should be negative. So I feel good, you know, my family and the staff, we all do our very best because we work from a tank full of hopefulness and a glass that's half full and not half empty. Having said that, as the Community Foundation, just briefly, as the foundation we're one of two in the Western Cape as community foundations. Our focus, I must say, it's not primarily, or the primary focus is not grant making and building the endowment. That's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is about women and children and the empowerment and the uplifting of women and children in that space. Our youth civic engagement program, which I felt that was very much a sought after one, sadly suspended for now. We are very active in the green economy, and with that I mean sustainable livelihoods and also take back the empty spaces in the city and wherever. Giving economy, so we help communities set up community funds and our giving circles, and that's really about enhancing local giving or horizontal philanthropy. My pet is listening for burning issues in communities, where we go in and listen, talk less and listen more. So that's really my pet. And then constitutional building, not only of the foundation as such, but also institutional buildings of CBOs, you know, looking at issues around governance, accountability, capacity building and training. So as a way of introduction, that's the Community Development Foundation. And let I say we are a very small team, 2.5, because we not all work full time and doing dual positions as we go along. But in terms of what's happening on the ground, reputable capital that we count on, and that is really the work force that, or the labor force, or the energy that holds the foundation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for kicking us off, Beulah, and for sharing the word of hope, because that's what we need in abundance in our world and in our societies right now. So thank you so much for kicking us off on that hopeful note. I will come back to you, Beulah, on a lot of the things that you've shared, the work on the upliftment and empowerment of women and young people. There's a lot of stuff that you shared with us that we need to go back to, but we'll also be asking our audience across the region and the world to also send in questions to hear a little bit more about what you do and the challenges that you're facing, but also some of the opportunities that you are seeing to help us advance the agenda for eradicating poverty and inequality in our societies. Let me go to Jeremy at this moment. And in going to Jeremy also, I also want to ask Jeremy to help us and our audience understand a little bit more about community foundations, to help us to say what are community foundations for those that are hearing about this term today. Are community foundations NGOs? Are they grant-making organizations? And what form do they exist in? Jeremy, you've got the floor.
Marlon, thank you, and welcome to everyone. Jeremy here. I'm the director for the Initiative for Community Advancement on the West Coast. So community foundations is not necessarily a African concept, although on this continent we've practiced giving for as long as there've been people on the continent. And community foundations are really mechanisms for community giving, financial and otherwise, where most of the time through community foundations they establish what is called a community fund, or what we call in our community foundation, we call it the community affiliated fund. And these affiliated funds would be issue-based or issue-focused funds where community members can directly donate towards, be it through debit orders that they sign and donate directly into the fund, or be it through fundraising events that are done locally, and profit from those fundraising events are being deposited into the community affiliated fund. So basically what community foundations do is it actually gives the community an ability to fund and support their own development. Because a lot of the times development aid comes from outside communities, and what the community foundation model offers is for local people to invest directly for their own development. In our country, we don't necessarily, in South Africa now, we don't necessarily have community foundation legislation. It means you can't register as a community foundation. You would still register as what is called a voluntary association, and be an NPO, or you can register as a trust, or you could even register as a non-profit company. In other countries around the world, for example, in the US, you'd have particular community foundations that are registered as a organizational form. So yeah, I think Marlon just briefly, that is what community foundations do, and registration forms in South Africa, we primarily would register it as a non-profit organization or as a trust or a non-profit company.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I think that's really very, very useful information that you've given us and our audience. As we mentioned at the beginning, that it's very important during this time of managing with natural disasters and epidemics to which not many have an answer. We are trading in a place where we've never been before as a society, at least in the last 100 years. And all of these challenges go back to the root of solutions, which is our communities. That's where a lot of the focus goes back to. And I think in the greater scheme of things, we've been discussing a lot on the issues of resources, even before COVID-19 struck. How the landscape for funding development work has changed, and how countries on our continent are moving towards looking for solutions within. And I think that with what you've given us, it's very clear to see why and how the role of community foundations is very important as part of those solutions of looking within for solutions to address some of the critical challenges that face us as a society. And so we will come back and discuss a little bit more in detail, and also to address questions from our audience. So thank you so much, Jeremy. So from the Western Cape in South Africa, we want to cross to the beautiful island of Madagascar. Bonjour, Niaina. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Yeah, very great. That's really good. So Niaina, I'm just going to ask you also a little bit to introduce yourself, introduce the organization that you do, but also just give us a sense of how Madagascar is coping with COVID-19. I think there's a lot of interest from across the continent and the world because of issues that have come out in the news on particularly within the Society of Madagascar and the search for indigenous sources of therapy. So just a few words of introduction from yourself, and to give us an overview on how the situation in Madagascar is.
Thank you very much, Manon. I am Niaina Harijaona, so I am the Executive Director of MSIS Tatao, which is a national NGO specialized on civil society capacity building and governance. And I'm as Executive Director of MSIS Tatao. I am also, the technical coordinator of the Ruh Movement. The Ruh Movement is the largest CSOs umbrella here in Madagascar, formed by more than 140 platforms and networks of civil society working in every topics. And so I am now try to explain the situation of Madagascar. Of course, the last 2 weeks, I think, we experienced, an increase of COVID-19 cases, and currently we have 6 deaths done. So it's not really, I'll say, very high, but people are still very afraid about the I'll say the evolution of the situation. And as a civil society organizations, from the beginning of this, this pandemic, we have been affected a lot because, of course, with the inability to travel and the limitation on movement, the restriction to do meetings, to organize meetings and workshops. We have many delays on activity implementation, and many delays on payments, and we could not pay. Some members of the Ruh Movement could not pay their staff adequately during the last 3 months, and so we are still suffering to do so till now. And in some cases, we could we have been forced, I'll say, to request for example, non-cost extensions that will have an impact in our organizations in the future, because of course we will find how to deal with this kind of unexpected expenses. And of course, it will have an impact in our ability to maintain our staff and maintain our activity in the next months and in the next years. So in Madagascar, the situation is quite, I would say, acceptable in terms of impacts of the pandemic. Broadly to the citizens, less than 10 deaths currently. It's I would say it's still acceptable, but of course, in the work that civil society organizations should do, for example, to really keep the government going in the good road, it is already difficult currently.
Merci, thank you so much, Niaina, for sharing that overview on the situation in Madagascar, but also bringing out the important insight on how civil society organizations as institutions themselves are being affected, and how the pandemic has disrupted the way in which you normally implement your activities, the way in which you either receive resources that help you to support communities that you work with. And I think these are some of the things that we need to share together, and also get examples from the other panelists, and also invite also from our audience to see what have been the examples that we share, particularly from the philanthropy sector. How have funding organizations supported civil society and community foundations to adapt to this new normal, so that we continue to serve the communities that are most vulnerable at this time. So at this juncture, I want to bring in Busisa Moyo, who joins us from Zimbabwe, from Bulawayo, the city of kings. Busisa, you are welcome. Busisa, you are chairperson of the I Am for Bulawayo campaign. We also would like to hear from you just broadly how COVID-19 has affected Zimbabwe, and specifically in your community. How are you seeing the impact of COVID-19 on the most vulnerable, and how have you responded?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on this call. Really appreciate the opportunity to share and to hear from others on the experiences they're having. As you know, Zimbabwe has not been spared from the effects of COVID-19. We are currently at 209 active cases. We have had 4 deaths related to COVID-19, and a few recoveries that have taken place. Zimbabwe has a lot of diasporans, or people in the diaspora. And when the lockdown happens in our surrounding or neighboring countries, in particular South Africa, they then make their way back home. And the source of most of the infections is from returnees, or people coming back from neighboring countries. And so this has been the source of some of these cases that have gone through the roof. We had a quiet period from April to around about the middle of May was very quiet. But of late, from about the 15th of May, with the increased quantities of returnees, we've seen a spike in the cases. We stayed at about 34 cases for a long time, but now in a short space of 2 weeks, we have risen to about 209 cases, which is pretty severe. Then there's the effects of the lockdown. We went into lockdown on the 30th of March. And we are now on what is called a level 2 lockdown, which is semi-open but not fully open. Schools are still closed. Churches are still closed, and some industries still have not been able to open if they are viewed as a high risk. So that creates a very difficult situation. As colleagues will know, Zimbabwe has had difficult economic conditions. Most of our people are unemployed or self-employed, living from hand to mouth, the larger population, that is the experience. And so when you have a lockdown, it basically takes away the ability to earn an income and to earn a living. And we've seen this of vendors, we have seen it of cross-border traders in particular, who have suffered from the effects of the lockdown. So there's a lot of social distress. And I Am for Bulawayo is a registered private voluntary organization which was incorporated on the 8th of April. So we haven't been around very long, but it was a response initially by business, but we have now incorporated civic society, doctors, and so we are a broad-based initiative in the city of Bulawayo. There's a mirror initiative in Harare, because we felt with the provincial lockdown, we couldn't travel between provinces. So it became necessary as a national strategy to have initiatives within cities and coordinators of made up of non-state actors, because some people will not donate to government for various reasons, maybe a lack of trust and so on. So it's necessary for non-state actors to come in and assist cities, communities, towns, villages to be as COVID ready as possible. And so we have become a model sort of response in Zimbabwe and in other cities. And we are looking at getting facilities ready. We are also looking at social and economic impact, assisting families, vulnerable groups we've identified through various ministries and arms of government. 50,000 families in our city. Our city is a city of 1 million people, and we've identified some families there, and we have done what we can. We've managed to give food hampers to about 1,000 families, which is a very small percentage. It's only about 4% of what is required. And that's why we are calling on non-state actors, friends in the diaspora and other organizations to assist us through donations. And we are glad to be in partnership with SA Trust, who has assisted us immensely in reaching out.
Thank you so much, Busisa, for sharing the perspective from Zimbabwe. And again, for those that have joined us when the conversation had already started, today we are focusing in our Society Talks webinar series on the impact of COVID-19 on community foundations and those that they serve in society, particularly those that are most vulnerable and marginalized. And so we've started with a very good round of getting an overview on the situation in South Africa, specifically in the Western Cape, from Madagascar, where Niaina comes from, and from Zimbabwe, where Busisa is reaching us from. So I want to go back to Beulah, to just check in, Beulah, specifically from your work, what kind of interventions has your organization been championing in response to COVID-19, if at all, and what kind of gaps are you seeing there in delivering the emergency responses that are much needed in communities?
Okay, thank you. I must say the lockdown, when it at the end of March came with a level of unpreparedness for all of us. And we were, first of all, not geared to work towards remotely. So transformation needed to happen there first, because our homes, we weren't ready, our homes weren't ready. And that was a huge adjustment. Having said that, secondly, the Community Foundation, CDF, it's called CDF, already on the back foot, you know, in terms of our own vulnerability. So just that, you know, there was no new funding for us, and we are already cutting in on what we had. So that was very difficult. And there was more a push that we must either stall our project funds if we had, but we did not have that. So there was very, very little room for removal, and most of our work had to be suspended. So, you know, our work plans for and our fundraising initiatives for 2020, all of that was suspended. And what we had to do was to look at what can we offer in terms of solidarity, because that was for us the key and a very important one. But I must say, with very, very little room to maneuver, the call from the field was not for money. It was not for money, but it was more for a listening ear. It was more for guidance and for solidarity. Yes, and I have heard this also from the broader community philanthropy field, that local people are coming to community philanthropy organizations as they saw this as the only and the best trusted source for support. And I think that was very key. But now, I said earlier that we work from an abundance of hope and abundance and of an abundance mentality. So what did we do? We went home, we working from home and set us up as possible as we could. We knew as a foundation that our approach is about agency. We knew it's about demonstrating the strength and the power by and for community. And that was an important one, that expressing and showing solidarity matters. We also said trust and trust-based relationships matter. And that was of utmost importance for the work we do. We knew that we are coming in from that space. We say that the way we normally work has changed. We saw that immediately. Although the field visits to partner organizations was suspended, fortunately that we received an essential worker certificate, and that gave us some mobility. And I think that was important. All in all, the foundation's long-standing work of building assets in local communities is able not only to capitalize, but also to maximize the capacity networking and the relationships that we had built over years. So that is it, but there were huge gaps. I mean, I can also tell you about the community response. I stand in awe of the community response, that when they reach out, not in terms of our solidarity, was big. Because, you know, in terms of stats, it suggests that the ground response in South Africa is predominantly driven by women. I must say that we witness an increased care economy, and the burden on women became just heavier. And I think that is important to know. I must also say that communities know more about their living conditions and the fault lines. So it was important for us to note that the solutions wasn't from us, but it was in community. Although most of the community outreach programs changed and became feeding projects, self-organization and self-mobilization became the order of the day on the ground, because they had the networks that could link, and the peer support was just, you know, for me, the gem in all of this. I must also talk about horizontal philanthropy by the people for the people. Must be noted. This is not because of the pandemic. Oh no, I must say, but be rather the spirit of Ubuntu. Because, you know, that has always been so, you know, and it was shown up in the present situation. And I have quite a number of examples, which we don't have at the time now to talk about. But what were the gaps, if you know, in the work that we do and what we saw as gaps? The foundation's approach is rooted in an integrated well-being framework. We are acutely aware of the gap that relates to mental health. Grief and pain will not be eased now that the lockdown has been eased from level 5, 3 to 3, level 3 restrictions. The Western Cape, with its rapid increase in infections, and this is the epicenter in South Africa, and the death rate that's so high now, we saw and experienced and watered down grieving rituals and restrictions. So that live streaming has become the order of the day. So yes, that's okay. But what if you don't have the internet? What do you do then for communities? Conversations regarding grieving and mourning is on, it's either been sought or it's not talked about. Another important gap is access to information and I think, and technology that we experience. To this, the inequalities of the education system were once again exposed, and children from the townships and at state-funded schools have no or very little access to studying from home. How must they study from home if they don't even have access to the internet or a computer? And I must say, many donors not changing the agenda to adequately locate funding for immediate and long-term relief. So we as civil society organizations felt very much trapped in rigid agendas, not focused on project funding streams. And that really, for me, was a very much difficult situation to navigate. And also for the community foundation, we are so vulnerable at the moment. We don't see that we will be around come September this year, because our operational costs went into just setting up us remotely, but still pay for our offices on the other side. And with no funding for anything else, what would we do? Within days of the first of our lockdown, so that was early April, we set up a COVID-19 relief response fund. And that really not only puts the foundation in a space of showing solidarity, but it connected us with our communities. And very soon we were out of that. And the community, in terms of the community fund that we launched, it was very much for the first relief in terms of helping the communities to follow through on the needs in their community.
Thank you so much, Beulah. I think that you've done a very good job of helping us to create a picture of really how community foundations and civil society broadly has been affected by the pandemic, but also even issues that were affecting us even before the pandemic struck, on the health of our institutions, the disruptions to delivery of essential services, essentially to support those that are in the front line. And I want us to move to issues of solution seeking and how we have adapted as community foundations and civil society. Unfortunately, because our time is limited, I'm going to ask the following speakers to use 2 to 3 minutes maximum in giving your snippets, because there's also questions that are coming from our audience that I'm going to ask you to respond to. So I'm going to start with Jeremy. That how have you transitioned in this current situation from the picture that Beulah painted, from having maybe worked from an office space to working from home, particularly for people that are working on the front line and with communities? In this lockdown situation, how are you managing? Are you able to go out there and meet communities that you are serving? What are you hearing, and what are some of the solutions that are coming from the people that you work with?
Marlon, thank you. I think some of the good, it's quite difficult to answer the question, because as a community foundation, and the way we operate, we really operate on an ability to have convenings. So most of our implementation is around getting people together in dialogue platforms, in networking engagements, etc. So of course, with the lockdown and all the stringent regulations around convenings, we were unable to have any physical convening since the very first lockdown. which has meant that we had to cancel quite a number of our planned engagements. One of which was actually a fundraiser, an annual golf day, which is a big fundraising event for our community foundation, which we of course had to cancel as well. But we, of course, much like other organizations, had to make use of technology quite a lot, using Zoom and a lot of other platforms to have meetings. And even just last week, for example, we launched an online talk show for the first time, because a lot of our work deals with young people. So we have a big youth focus, and we actually had last year in November, we concluded our regional youth research paper, where we found that one of the bigger issues that young people face in our region is around sort of mental health issues. A lot of young people has indicated during the research that they've contemplated suicide, suffering from depression, etc. So our recently launched online talk show actually focuses on now topics, has a lot to do with depression and things like this. And I think the COVID-19 lockdown has added to this, because if you can't engage with people and you're isolated and you're already suffering from mental and depression and things like this, and it exacerbates your problem. So our response has very much been on looking differently, using technology innovatively, and simply using some of the free tools that are available online. Unfortunately or fortunately, we could use 40 minutes Zoom calls and then stop the call and then start the fresh, to have another free 40 minutes. So there is just ways that we were able to use and to able to continue our work. I can say that one of the things that we've done, our municipality had a very coordinated approach to food security, whereby our community foundation was asked to render food delivery services in our ward, which is Ward 5 in our municipal area. And through that, we've actually established an emergency Meals on Wheels, where we distributed over 6,000 cooked meals since the beginning of the lockdown. We distributed close to 500 food parcels. 250 toiletry packs were donated by our youth bank project, where they donated to young people 250 sanitary towel packs and toiletry packs generally. So yes, and also of course food donations from farms and from farmers and farmers' wives, and the municipality, etc. So we've sort of worked quite differently in that we started in response to COVID-19. The community foundation started rendering services directly, food security services, because and this is not something that community foundations ordinarily do. Ordinarily, community foundations enable and support projects in communities with financial and other means. But because of this unprecedented times, our community foundation specifically had to render services in a particular ward. So yeah, this is just sort of how we were impacted and how we were able to respond in a different way.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing on that one. I want to jump straight from where you left us off to Niaina to hear the Madagascar situation again. Niaina, from Madagascar, can you share with us some of the innovations that communities specifically, and also civil society broadly, have been coming up with to respond to the disruptions that COVID-19 has brought to life on the island? Madagascar is a very big island. Are you able to reach communities, especially those that are living in remote areas, and how are you able to do this? Sorry, Niaina, you are muted.
Okay. Many thanks, Nolan. So you should understand that in Madagascar, the pandemic COVID-19 had impact mainly in urban areas. So in three big towns of Madagascar, which is the capital and the economic capital, also where is Arbor, and another big city. So these are the 3 towns that have been really affected by the COVID-19. And of course, in our country, we had already before, even before the crisis, a problem of, you know, of foods security, of course, even in the capital. And you should understand also that more than 80% of works of people are working in informal sector. So they should work daily to be able to get money to buy foods. But because of the crisis and the COVID-19 and the lockdown, they couldn't now work correctly, and they couldn't get money to buy foods. So what the state have done is to provide foods and cash to these vulnerable people. So it's each person has been given about 20 or $25 for 1 month just to buy food. And the state also has distributed some food, soaps, and something like this to all the communities, vulnerable people in these 3 towns. But the problem is about the selection and the identification of who should benefit from these subsidies, and from who should benefit from these cash transfers. And the work that we have done as a civil society organization is now to try to conduct a survey and to conduct also some control on the use of funds, on the distribution of funds. And we are still continuing to do this kind of work just to ensure that the people in need will benefit from these supports that have been given by the state. But it's a very huge challenge because, you know, we have a very high level of corruption, and the state currently, because of the new law, the state of emergency, they take decision without consultations of stakeholders. They can take decision beyond the normal laws currently. So it's a little bit difficult because there is no consultation, there is lack of transparency on the users' funds, no reports on the users' funds, and no competition on public markets or something like that. And maybe you have heard, but the Ministry of Education intended to buy sweets for $2 million. So that's the problem here is the lack of transparency and corruption, and the work that we are doing currently as civil society at national level is try to do a citizen controls of these public actions. And we are trying to mobilize our local CSOs members to do also the implementation of these public actions at their community levels. So these are the main action that we are doing, and we are trying to exchange information between us. We are trying to do advocacy to our government and we are trying to have a good collaboration and exchange with donors just to have their support on how we should tackle to
the good practice that you have shared with us, that we are seeing government and municipalities inviting the services of community foundations in Madagascar. So that's commendable practices that are being noted by our audience. And thank you to Beulah also for responding to some of that Beulah has responded to. I want to go to Busisa because there's a question on the situation in Zimbabwe, specifically on partnerships. One of our, I think it's Simpiwe, asked that with all the tough economic conditions you are facing in Zimbabwe, are there any social and economic relief packages that are being provided by the state? And I want to add, Busisa, I hope you also will be short in your response. What other partnerships are you seeing in models and good models? You spoke about I Am for Bulawayo being something that started primarily from private sector. What other partnerships are important to ensure that those that are most vulnerable and are in marginalized communities are not left behind in these our responses to the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so what we have done is we have connected with, we have Bulawayo, but we say we are Bulawayo and surrounds, which is, you know, cities and towns like Plumtree, Wange, Gwanda, Escotini, places that are close. So, and there are a lot of marginalized communities in there. We haven't had the resources to be able to reach everybody. But what government has done, they have promised, I don't think it's been delivered yet, but they've promised a social grant to vulnerable groups. They've identified, I think it's 1 million rural families. I think the rural folk is easier. The challenge is the cities. So in the rural areas, they've got database. You know, they've got a database of all the families in rural areas that, you know, even because remember that Zimbabwe went through a cyclone recently. It went through drought. So those databases were developed during that time. So they kind of know, but those were rural folk, remember, because that's who was most affected. In the cities, however, we're starting to see a lot of urban hunger in a city, in the locations or high density suburbs. We're starting to see a lot of hunger, child-added families, widows, grandmothers looking after orphan children on account of HIV, who, you know, were already, you know, sort of selling, vending to look after the children. And now with the lockdown, they can't sell their wares. They can't sell, you know, fruit, vegetables, tomatoes, and so on the street corner, literally. So those people, now there's an exercise going to find out who are they, where are they, so that assistance can be targeted correctly. Our challenge as private sector has been, we need to do it quickly because, you know, hunger, you know, is not waiting. It's actually affecting families.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Busisa. I think that was very short, but quite precise and insightful on the situation in Zimbabwe and the response of the state and some of the partnerships that you know, you've been able to engage with there. I want to come to Beulah there. There's the question that's been shared on food security, and you've shared with us in the information box there. I wonder if you can respond on the issues of hunger, particularly as it affects women. You mentioned before the importance of solidarity, but how you say that the burden on women and children has increased. What are you seeing there, and what kind of suggestions could you share with the group on how we can collectively ensure that we respond, particularly to the situation of women in the poorest communities, including the ones that you're working with?
Did I say on the whole issue around hunger and food, there was quite a push for food parcels, but because many of our CBOs on the ground, you know, that they were in feeding situations, feeding 300 to 400 families per day. That, of course, has increased almost double. And we then decided when we launched the fund not to go the food parcel mode, because it was all about dignity and not standing in a queue for food. So what did we do? With the COVID-19 relief fund, we made small community grants. So, and the grants was very clearly, here is some funding for food, because it's the first relief. And together with that, some funding for data and for taxi money. So we did that very intentionally, because it was about dignity, and it was also to help women to be creative about what and how they would feed families. And I think that was a very important strategy for us, in terms of that women felt, we've spoken, you heard us, you took some time to listen and you heard us. That was one of the things. Secondly, that communities, and especially our women on the ground, knew their communities very well. They knew the vulnerable families, they knew their children in the communities. And so that was that, but we felt their homes became also the hub for communities. And the safe spaces for communities where they can come to come and collect their food. And what I really liked in many of our communities, that it wasn't giving a parcel of food, that women came, or families came, or children came, and they came with their own pots, their own utensils, and it became a family meal at home, from home to home. And I think for me, that was a very important human strategy because amidst everything else, this was very important. So I think when I said women, and the burden was so much more on them, in terms of also dealing with young people, and also their husbands unemployed and being home. Because remember, most of in the families where we work, it's piecemeal work or contract workers, and they were all home. And we also heard about more increased gender-based violence issues that was there, because the pressure in the home was just too much to bear. And so when I said that the burden on women was, they were the providers and they were the big connectors. So we saw just the level of peer support amongst our community-based organizations, that whatever they had, they could share with others. So if they received a demand, they received in excess more food or ingredients or anything else, they could share that with others. So it was that level, what I talk about horizontal giving, that was so important. And I think that is for us a very important, not to lose out on what we have witnessed around that. And then I also want to say, that was, as much as the pandemic showed us many realities, it showed us a very powerful reality of women as bridge builders. And they were connectors. We have so many new strategic partners on board because of the connectors, the connections we made in the pandemic. Somebody said that the pandemic is like the Good Samaritan, because all of a sudden people became aware of the poor. So we had horizontal philanthropy, where people would where we say for the people and also by the people. So that's how different levels of how horizontal philanthropy works. But in some instances, we have a predominantly more middle-class community now adopting and supporting a township community. And you know, it's now very much more visible. And maybe that's the one way to say that we need to strengthen those kind of relationships that COVID-19 has showed and has emerged through the COVID-19 pandemic. And for me, that is the hopeful situations that we can build on. You know, so the opportunities for new collaboration and partnerships, not out from donor communities in a vertical situation, but more horizontally, that has really emerged as a very strong bridge builder. And women were the big flag carriers for us.
That's such a powerful tone, Beulah. If it will be your last one in this conversation to share, thank you so much. I think we cannot overemphasize the importance of solidarity and the role that women play in this situation, and women have always played. So thank you so much for sharing on that. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wind down in the next 6 minutes or so, and I want to give the three panelists that are left just your final remarks, as you say, and maybe a little bit of some of the questions that have come from our audience. And Jeremy, from you, just will be to share what are the lessons that we have learned from this pandemic. It's not yet gone. It will be with us for a long time to come. In fact, none of us really know how things will pan out. But what have we learned in how we organize ourselves as society and as communities, and also taking the cue from what Beulah has shared with us about the importance of philanthropy by the people for the people, and particularly our young people. What are those signs of hope that you are seeing, and what kind of future do you think we should be creating now?
Thank you, Marlon. I think the biggest lesson that I take from this COVID-19 pandemic and how we've sort of dealt with it is that the realization that people at community level have the ability to get through whatever life throws at them if they do it collectively and in collaboration. So be it COVID-19 or be it a storm in Mozambique or whatever we go through as people, if at the community level we can come together and collaborate, then we can overcome whatever we're faced with. So I would plead with everyone who's listening today to find those outstanding organizations in your local community that does work, and it works at a level of professionalism, transparency, and honor, and support those organizations because they need your support. And to echo what Beulah is saying, a lot of the times people don't necessarily want money, but people just want you to support them in their everyday efforts. And those are sort of my final words and lessons learned.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that. And again, tapping in from what Beulah shared with us is that what communities are asking for is just an ear. At certain times, it's not all about the money, but in her words, is to listen more and to talk less. And those are the kind of partnerships that we'll be looking at. But thanks so much for sharing those lessons. I want to go to Niaina to check from your last remarks from where you are in Madagascar. What has been the biggest lesson that you have learned, or that as civil society has learned? Also noting that Madagascar has faced so many storms, literally, before, but you've managed to come back strong. What are those kind of lessons that you want to share with the rest of our audiences? And also maybe a word from you on the issues of indigenous sources of therapy and indigenous solutions in helping us to manage disasters, and particularly COVID-19. Niaina.
You know, for last month, indigenous decoction, of course, it is produced by a very well-known and very famous research institute here in Madagascar. And at the beginning, people were confident about the results. And as I said, when it was the decoction that have been used from the research, Malagasy Research Institute. Yeah, people were very keen to use to drink it and to use it as prevention and as treatment. But now, since the last 2 weeks, our president experiment new products, which are injections, in collaboration with United States researchers and Mauritius researchers. And the new products, with the new products, you know, it is not really based on the first one. So people are very cautious about this new one. So it's the main challenge that we face, because our president wanted to move to a modern drugs, but it's not really accepted by the local population now. Yeah, maybe because also there are foreigners that are working on that, and it's not really it's not only controlled by the Malagasy National Research Institute. It is going beyond their control currently. That's why people are starting to be cautious about this kind of these drugs. On civil society, you know, for example, we have learned from this crisis, but having good connection with CSOs at grassroots levels is very important, because with the restrictions of travel, of meetings, of workshops, we couldn't not implement any activities we didn't have even before the crisis. Some representatives, local CSOs that were working with local authorities at municipalities and commune levels. So have this kind of cross-level linkages between actors and between civil society organizations is very key when we want to know to cover the country like Madagascar. Another finding that I want to as a kind of lessons learned also is because of the use of new technology, we had to rely on youth people, because you know, young men and young women master new technology than, you know, elder people. So we have used many of our youth-led CSOs to conduct survey, to monitor the implementation of our activities, and also to report on these activities, to have exchange with us. So the roles of youth-based organizations were very key during this the response of this crisis. I would say these are the two main experiences and lessons learned that we want to build on in the future here to reinforce the intervention of civil society, and of course the sector of governance, improving accountability, transparency of information, pushing the law of access to information are one of what will be our key priorities in the next months and next years.
Thank you so much, Niaina. I think that's a lot of very good sharing that you've given us, and models for lessons to carry into the future that you're leaving with us. I think we will want to continue the conversation going. Before I go to Busisa to be the last panelist, maybe to share the lessons and your perspective on the future you want to see, as a comment from the Cross-Border Traders Association. I'm not sure which one it is, whether it's the Southern Africa Cross-Border Traders Association. And they say, we think that the impact of COVID is an indictment and opportunity for foundations working with municipalities to design business and housing linkages between environment for health going forward. So that's the comment that's there. From our colleagues from the Cross-Border Traders Association. Busisa, I think your last words from you in 2 minutes or so is just to check from yourself in Zimbabwe, the kind of Zimbabwe that you have seen during this pandemic and the kind of Zimbabwe that you want to see the day after we defeat COVID-19. And what are the signs of hope that you have witnessed as you have done your work within private sector and within the campaign for I Am for Bulawayo and the other community foundations that are working in partnership with yourself? We can't hear you, Busisa.
Well, thank you for the question, Marlon. I'll have to summarize very quickly, but there are lots of things that we have observed. But I think the key observations are that pay attention to the development of healthcare sector as developing African countries. Make sure it's progressing. As private sector, I think we've done lots of CSIR, community response. We have a corporate citizenship program. It really didn't touch on the health aspect, and I think it's one area that we need to encourage continually to look at our health facilities, because our colleagues in businesses and at work, when a pandemic hits, whether it's COVID-19, Zika, or cholera, we still need these institutions to be strong. So I expect to see resilience in the healthcare sector being built through corporate, private sector and public sector cooperation and participation. We need to look at it together. So that's a key takeaway from this COVID experience. The second one is value chain resilience. To, as a country like Zimbabwe should be able to look after its people. We should populate our country with industry that is able to cover at least the food security aspects of the country. So we have to industrialize and improve production, primary output, agricultural output, because we've seen that when a pandemic hits, countries tend to look inward. They close up, they close borders, and goods cannot move. And so within countries, we must have resilience and capacity to produce food, at least, otherwise we start to have health problems. And then also, we need to extend that to be provincial as well, because provinces, if you're in South Africa, you can't go from Gauteng to Mpumalanga. It becomes a problem, again, because we tend to lock down in the event of crisis. So these are important structures, and it must be deliberate and intentional. For small countries like ours, developing countries, it's something we need to pay attention to. Then the third level is to make sure, Marlon, colleagues, that we regionally, we strengthen. So as a region, whether it's Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, South Africa, we need to have adequate regional value chains that supply, I would say, 80% of what we need. In the event of a global crisis, in the event of a major disruption in supply chains, we have learned that far and wide or far-flung
globalization or global integration in terms of trade is problematic. And so we need to start having these conversations about how do we create regional resilience as a sub-Saharan Africa, because goods can still get from Zimbabwe to Namibia throughout the whole COVID pandemic. So these relationships as lobbyists for private sector cooperation, we should also look at regional cross-border cooperation for resilience, and so that these sub-regions like a SADC is able to survive a shock.
Thank you so much, I think, for that, Busisa. I think all of you have really been articulate on the lessons that we have learned and some of the critical nuggets that we need as different societies. As you said, when pandemics or disasters hit, nations look within. And when nations look within, they look to communities for solutions. And that's one of the critical reasons why we had set up this conversation and why it's been so good to hear from you today. The importance of solidarity, you all emphasized how important it is to remain connected amongst each other, the issue of partnerships across sectors, working with municipal authorities, working with national governments. And Busisa, you just mentioned the issue of transnational solidarity, strengthening our region and our continent. The issue of mental health as well, that a couple of you mentioned, that in all of this, strong institutions and strong organizations depend on strong individuals. They are built on the shoulders of strong men and women, and the mental health is a big part of that jigsaw and is quite important. The issue of resources, beyond the money, what resources do we bring from our communities to respond to the challenges that are affecting us? As well, Niaina mentioned a lot on the importance of data, transparency on information, that we can only defeat natural disasters, including COVID-19, if as a society we are transparent on what is affecting us, and information, everyone has access to information and credible information. And that also brings the importance of technology. And it's good to note that we all have been forced, and for those of us that have been sitting on the fence, to leapfrog into the fourth industrial revolution and to embrace the power of technology as a resource to address the challenges that we're facing. But in addressing the power of technology, as well as to ensure that no one is left behind. And I think that is a part of our continued struggle, is to ensure how do we find appropriate technologies that will help us to reach those that would otherwise be left behind in the margins of society. I think I will use the moderator's chair perhaps to give Beulah the last word on this, Beulah. The new normal. I know that you've rejected going back to the old normal. Just your word on what new normal do you want to see the day after we defeat COVID-19?
Thank you. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic gave, it's large-scale disruptions. It brought about COVID-19. And with that, the uncertainty, even anger, reminded me, and I'm from Cape Town, and I'm from the Western Cape, of the scale of devastation after a big mountain fire. Sorry, I am the hook. And what happens to the fynbos? Nature's healing power is an important one to note. And let's ask nature about that, Fire acts as a mineralizing element for the fynbos, in that the ash that left behind after the fire returns to mineral elements. Thus, the disturbance the fire causes makes water nutrition and light more available for new growth and healing. So, communities healing mineral elements of resilience, of agency, authentic knowledge of the fault lines in their communities should not be ignored, but move to center space. And for me, the new normal is this: we cannot go back to what in March 2020. The new normal is where we embrace the technology and we need support for that. But also the new normal is to write our narratives that we've learned about the COVID-19 pandemic. And you know, we've also learned, there were lessons learned from Ebola, HIV, AIDS, and other pandemics. So why is it that we did not learn from that and that we've been so unprepared? So for me, the new normal will really to listen and listen and listen more, capture the stories and bring that to the place. It's not business as normal, but I also want to say to the donors the same thing. That, you know, I know many of us, I am hopeful that we will be there, but not on the way the structures are currently, you know, there's a structural deficit in the work we do. And civil society organizations in the philanthropy sector is not essential worker in the essential worker space. So for me, that is very important. And let me not, what about the youth? What about the intergenerational narratives? That conversations need to happen. And we cannot lose those opportunities. So I want to say in closing, COVID-19 pandemic opened up a new pathway for us, a new opportunities that's there for the taking. And we should not be scared to take the risk and go for that, you know? And so that's my closing, that listen to what our communities, because before we could be ready for our solidarity, communities were already in it, because you know what? They've been in it before. It's not new, but it has escalated the situation. I think.
Thank you so much, Beulah. I will try not to pollute those beautiful last words, those inspiring closing remarks to all of us. But what's left for me is to thank all of you, our panelists from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Madagascar, for being generous with your time and your experiences, for coming to share. I think we would love to have you again for another conversation to dig deeper into these issues and the role that communities are playing and that communities will continue to play in helping support us through natural disasters, being COVID-19 or whatever may come to face us in the future. Thank you so much for our audience, for your patience. We had to let us have a little bit more time to discuss these issues at length. Thank you for your questions and comments, and do join us again next Wednesday at the same time, when we will be having the 8th edition of the Society Talks webinar series to discuss on another important topic of interest to our communities. I'm just going to ask my panelists to remain behind as we cut off from the live feed. Thank you so much and good evening to everyone. Bye-bye.